Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the panel for being here. It's a very important topic, and it's something that has to be addressed. And with the original choke point, federal regulators carried out a coordinated campaign of harassment against law-abiding businesses based on thinly defined reputational and regulatory risk. That resulted in the systemic debanking of thousands of American businesses, legal businesses, and I would argue constitutionally protected businesses, like gun dealers, pawn shops, and installment lenders. While the first Trump administration ended this abuse of regulatory power, the Biden administration regulators wasted no time in bringing it back with a new target: innovators and entrepreneurs. My first question, Mr. Campbell. To carry out their politically motivated campaign against American innovation, Biden regulators used something called supervisory non-objection letters. Could you briefly explain what these letters are and what they meant for banks?
Yes, of course. It basically requires a bank to go to a regulator and get non-objection, that is to say they don't tell you no, to be allowed to engage in any sort of banking activity.
So in your opinion, do these letters change the law as enacted by Congress?
I think when they are abused, there is that potential, yes. In fact, to the previous representative's point, we're somewhat twisted around here in that the regulators took the stance of because some actors in a space are bad, we will therefore debank all of the actors in a space, which you will notice is the exact sort of line of thinking that's been promulgated to justify the actions of the FDIC with regard to choke point, but also, was the rationale behind redlining and the denial of banking services to minorities in the past. So I would suggest it's a governance issue. Yes, sir.
All right, thank you for that. The Trump administration regulators, particularly the OCC, also used supervisory interpretive letters during his first term. What are the main differences between those interpretive letters and the supervisory non-objection letters issued under the Biden administration?
Well, interpretive letters are attempting to parse through the law and give people a path to either engage in actions or a rationale not to engage in those actions, hopefully well-founded. And when they're made public, I think they're very valuable because then everybody is playing by the same rule set. The non-objection letters were particularized, individual, and private. So exactly as Mr. Graywall said earlier, there's no way to know what each individual bank is being told, and it allows a regulator to say one thing publicly and do something else privately, or just as bad, favor some banks over others.
So I guess the title of the letters is definitive, interpretive versus non-objectionable. Okay, well, thank you for that. And Mr. Graywall, did the Biden administration specifically issue these supervisory non-objection letters to target digital assets that were previously allowed by the Trump administration?
Yes.
If banks must ask regulators for explicit permission to bank crypto firms, how does this affect their willingness to bank those firms?
It discourages those banks from even trying in the first place, Congressman. And the reason is that having to submit those requests under a well-defined framework with a deadline is one thing, but to simply submit and await an answer whenever and according to whatever standard the regulator deems fit, that's something else entirely, and that's something that ultimately discourages banks from even participating in the first place.
So are you aware of any banks that went through the non-objection process? And if so, how did those banks fare?
I'm aware of many examples of banks who have went through that process as a result of the documents that we secured through our FOIA suit against the FDIC. And what we saw in the documents that were produced just yesterday is that in case after case, when the banks stepped forward and raised their hands and asked for permission to offer basic services, they were either ignored or they were given detailed examination and re-examination and re-examination until they simply gave up.
So there was a time, and I believe that the administrative state was established to work with industry to provide guidance, create some consumer protection. I remember when FDIC was viewed as a partner with banks, would help the banks to operate in a functional. This sounds to me like this is an adversarial relationship instead of a partnership. Would you agree with that?
I would. If there was an offer made, it was an offer that the banks were not allowed to refuse.
Well, thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair